Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Teri M Brown, award-winning author of character-driven fiction, co-host of the Writers Lounge podcast, guest host of Online for Authors, and motivational speaker. Welcome to the show, Teri.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You are welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the world will benefit from what we are talking right now. We are talking about mastering writing and marketing as an author. We will understand that from you. So my first question to you, Teri, is, you talk about connecting readers with characters they would love to invite to lunch. And I see that you write on war and conflict. See both the books, An Enemy Like Me, and I wrote, Sunflowers Beneath the Snow. Help us understand who wants to invite those characters to lunch at.
So, although my characters are in war situations, they're really normal, everyday people. They are the people that you know as neighbors, and they are the people that you know as friends. They just have found themselves in really, unusual situations. Like in Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, they live in communist Ukraine. And, it isn't a great place to be, and their life isn't fantastic, but they themselves are really interesting people. And that's what I really do is although a lot of my situations, you see them in World War II, or you see them in these settings, it isn't really about the setting. It's about that person and how are they getting through in their life in a way that is positive despite some really not so positive things going on in their life. So that's what I do is I really, really look to the character and make that character so real that you would want to sit down with them and find out more about who they are.
Right. Looking at these two books, why do you write such writing? And also I want to understand, as an author, do you imagine these characters or these characters come into your imagination out of the real world?
So a little bit of both. So Sunflowers Beneath the Snow is about 3 generations of Ukrainian women. And I met a Ukrainian girl. At the time, she was in her early 20s. And she told me a story that was really, really incredible. And it was so incredible that I decided to write an entire book where 82,000 words are fiction, and it's to tell her 3 pages of truth. So I made all of this stuff up so that I could do that. Her character, the one that is, her really isn't. It's in my mind. And her mother and her grandmother are completely in my mind. So sometimes characters come to me because someone said or did something. I had another idea for a book, and I haven't written this one yet. I've kind of been playing around with it, but I listened to a song. And the words to the song made me think, well, I wonder what would happen if, which led me down to, well, if that happened, I wonder what would happen. And before long, this character was in my mind. And I thought, ooh, that would be a cool character. So, yeah, I think that the reason that I write is something will happen that will spark an idea. And that idea then develops this character. And then my character, I tell people I have characters that live in my head. And then they talk to me and they say, look, I've got this story. You have to tell it for me. And eventually then I sit down and start writing that story.
Right. And in this of An Enemy Like Me, you have taken this whole backdrop of World War II. How, from the World War II to the present day, how do you manage to traverse all this distance and put them into writing?
I tell people all the time, because I'm asked all the time, how do you do the writing with like dual timelines? And, how do you keep it all straight? You have to have a reason for having a dual timeline. Like, what is your reason? And as soon as you have that reason, everything else hangs on that and will fit. For An Enemy Like Me, the reason is I had a 4-year-old child whose father went away to war. And I'm trying to explain this from his point of view, but he's 4. And so I'm having trouble allowing him to be 4 years old and be able to explain what all this means. And then I thought, now, wait a minute. If he were an adult man looking back, then I could have his explanation. So I was able to do both. I told it from the story as a 4-year-old, but I also told it as the adult man looking back. And because I had that reason, I needed that explanation, then it made sense. And so I did a 1 day in a life of this man who's now grown up. He is visiting the grave of his father. He's remembering. And then I use all of that as a way to get back to World War II. And then we would come back to his memories and go back and forth. And that's how I did that. And I think you just have to have a good reason for going back and forth. If you're just going back and forth because you feel like it, I think it's easier to get lost. But if you have a specific reason as to why you're doing it, then you can hang all of your chapters on those reasonings, and then it makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely, Teri. So, how do you do this research for your book? And this is where this whole, learning from a master like you goes. How do you do the research? Second part is that how do you work on the moral side of such issues? Which side is wrong? Which side is right? An author is not, even if it's a fiction writer, an author is not just a storyteller. They, in a way, they interpret history, and that is what people in future generations are going to understand the past as. So, how do you decide when there are protagonists, antagonists, and everyone sees the world in their own manner? And from the First, Second World War, a lot of things have been said or
Right.
told in a different, but in the present day, whichever side you look, it can be a very different version. As a writer, how do you maintain or straddle all those dilemmas, and as well as able to tell the story that you want to tell about?
So we'll start with the research. I think that at least when you're doing historical fiction, which is what I've been writing, you really want your history to be correct. So I'm a firm believer in, like, I'm not going to make stuff up. I make up a lot of things in terms of my characters, but in terms of what was going on in history, I try to really be accurate. So, there's books and I mean, you can even watch movies and other things and kind of get an idea as to like what is real and what is happening. One of the reasons I love to write multiple characters, so like in Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, there are 3 main characters. In An Enemy Like Me, there are 3 main characters. And one of the reasons I like to do that is it allows you to explore things from many sides. And so sometimes I don't have to choose. Sometimes I get to explore it from different sides. In Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, I have the grandmother who she firmly still believes in communism, even as it's going away. And she still is hanging on to that system because it's what she's known her whole life. And then I have her daughter who, has totally embraced the new system, right? And she's for capitalism. And then we have the granddaughter who's kind of looking at it all saying, why are we still fighting over this? She sees it because she's never lived any of it. And so she doesn't have the same perspective. So one of the things that I try to do is not just look from one point of view. I really think it's important to look at things from a lot of different points of view, because you're right. What is history? Well, history is written by the winner. It's not written by the loser. And depending on who you are and where you live and what your government happens to be saying is how you interpret what history was. And so I try to look at it from as many angles as I can and let my readers kind of make a decision. In An Enemy Like Me, he is a first-generation German American. He fights in the war. He believes he's going to fight the Japanese. He ends up in Germany, fighting in Germany, where the people here speak the language that was spoken in his own home growing up. And he recognizes he's more like the enemy than he is different from the enemy. And my point in this story is not that I don't like the military or that I don't even think we need it or any of those things. It's we need to think about it. We need to think about war and what war does and what makes an enemy and how do we even need enemies? And those are the kinds of questions that I hope people ask. I don't necessarily answer it. I just want people to start thinking. Like what does it mean to you? And now start contemplating that in your own life and in your own mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you delve into the politics of it all? Because at the end of the day, you may, someone who is an enemy like me, you may want to, because many are dragged into a war. But it is the political system, vested interests, vested politicians.
Right.
They push people into war, and most of the places, if you see, firstly they hobble, they appease, and then they suddenly want to have things their own way, and then they give their own reasons. You see, for Second World War, you see even now, and we can be so not going into politics of it, but as an author, how do you deal with politics when you are dealing with things like war? Do you just sidestep politics altogether? Because or you also try to pinpoint some sort of understanding that these enemy, whoever is the enemy, because this is a different world. Earlier the propaganda used to work differently, now the propaganda works differently, but then people also are very aware. They have different tools to see through you.
So you have to do it in a whole different way. Yes. So one of the things that like in an enemy like me, and we look at the fact, like his wife doesn't want him going to war. She doesn't see the need for it. Why do you have to go? Like, fine, there's a war, but why should you have to go? You're not the one that has to fight it. So I try to look at the politics from as many different angles as I can. Once again, it's not my place to tell you what you should believe. But if I can help you look at a few different sides that maybe you hadn't considered before, now maybe when you make decisions, you will have some other facts to kind of temper whatever it is that you thought originally, and so like in Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, we're talking about communism, and then we're talking about when the Soviet Union falls, and I just try to show what was happening to the people during these periods of time. And the mother, the grandmother who has lived in communism all her life, she actually makes a very valid statement, which is, where do you think new leaders are going to come from? They're just going to come from the old leadership, and they're going to put on a new brand, but they're going to be the same leaders. Do you really expect things to change very quickly? And when you look at Ukraine and at that time period, they did not change very quickly because the people who came into power were the people. And so I just want people to kind of think about the fact that, we go in all big and brave and we take care of these countries, and we're going to make them, immediately become, something else. And you can't, because the infrastructure is not there and the leadership isn't there, and all of those things. And so it's just a matter of kind of getting people to look at, it's not as black and white as you think. We would love to believe that you go in and you fight a war, and the reason is that everybody on that side is bad. But what Jacob came to realize was, most of these people fighting in the war are just like me. They're just like me. They have families at home. They want to make it home to their families. They're just trying to preserve their way of life. Or maybe they didn't even have an option, and they're here in this war because the government drafted them, and they would rather be anywhere else but here. And that's what he kind of recognizes. And so I think my role as an author is not to tell you what to think, but to provide you with some options to make you look at things from several points of view, so that you can, at least now when you go and you make a decision about what you're going to think, you have some more facts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then in your third book, Daughters of Green Mountain Gap, you have moved to the Appalachian Healers, and it's
Yes.
launching in 2024. Why this shift, or is it also, or is it about your own personal journey about healing?
No, you know what's interesting is this story came about like totally crazy. I had a wart on my thumb. And I was complaining to my brother that when I had gone to the doctor didn't want to remove it in the office. They wanted to send me to a specialist, and I was just kind of irritated. And my brother said, "Why don't you get someone to talk the wart off?" And I thought, what are you even talking about? You know, are you teasing with me? And he knows of someone who apparently had learned it from his grandmother, and you whisper to the wart, and within a few days it falls off. So I looked that up because I thought this was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. And it led me down this path to start reading about these mountain healers who used a lot of herbs and roots and a little bit of what I just call mountain magic, this idea that they believe that they have this healer power within them and they use it to help others. And so I don't know, it was so intriguing to me that the more I read, the more I thought, oh, there's got to be a book in this. And then this character, and her name was Maggie, and she just came to my mind, and all of a sudden I knew where this story needed to go. So that one just came out of just something crazy because I had a wart on my thumb. But I think when you talk with authors, you'll find that so many of their books come from they heard a conversation at the pool, or like I said, a song lyric touched them, or an enemy like me came about because my grandfather said something to me that really just stuck with me. He fought in World War II, and his we're German American, but many generations in the United States. And he told me, I always wondered if the person on the other side of my gun was a cousin. And that stuck with me, and that's kind of where that book came from. So I think that it's just very interesting how it doesn't even have to be anything really about your own life. It just has to be something that touched you and sparked that little story that made you now want to start writing and creating a character that's going to, live through something or have to engage in some way.
Right, right, Terry. So let me ask you one question. When you write on war, and then you write on this Appalachian healers, then how do you market yourself as an author? Because one can want to that you write on war itself because that sells more. How this is where the learning is for the authors, budding authors. So someone who wants to market them better, how should you look at marketing yourself when you are writing on different things?
Yeah, so marketing is wow. When I first started writing, I didn't even know I needed to market. I thought that I would write a book and I would put it on Amazon and I would ta-da! And I was very surprised when that did not happen. And so I had to start thinking about you're not really marketing your book, you're really marketing you, because people follow authors. And so you want them to get to know the author at least as much as you're willing to share, of your life. So I do a lot of podcasts where I get on as a guest and I talk about my books, but I also answer questions about, like, when do you like to write? And is there any food that you prefer to eat when you're writing? And people just love to know that kind of thing. Right. So that's one of the things is like getting on podcasts where I can be me and I can just let other people hear who I am. Then I also had to think about the fact that although I'm writing historical fiction, I actually have a character in my mind right now that doesn't fit the historical fiction at all. So how do I get people to recognize that I don't just have to write one genre? And that's when I really started pushing the idea of characters and the idea that when you read my books, you're going to read books of characters that you enjoy. And it isn't going to really be about the setting, although there are settings. you're going to go with my character because you have fallen in love with my character. And if my character happens to go into World War II, well, then that's where you're going to go. But if this character happens to live at the beach in 2023, that's where you're going to go. So I'm really kind of pushing myself as a character-driven fiction. And yes, I write historical fiction, but I also write, and what I really write is characters. So you have to really think about, who are you? What do you want in your writing? And then what is the best way to get that out to people?
Right.
Who are your readers? Because not everybody is your reader.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me ask you, who is Teri M Brown? You were born in Athens, Greece. You had a family background. If someone was in Air Force, maybe your dad or someone.
Yeah, my dad.
From that to this place now in North Carolina, you could be doing anything else. Why writing? And especially with a family background in Air Force, how did that shift happen?
So it's crazy. When I went to college, I have a degree in psychology, and I have a degree where I can teach school. And I haven't taught school, and I don't use my degree in psychology. Then I got married. I had children. I decided that I wanted to be at home with the kids. I ended up working online, and I started writing for small businesses. And it's because I'm good with words, and I knew I was good with words. And there are a lot of small businesses that just do not have what it takes to put stuff up on the internet. So I got started doing this in 1999. And, the internet was still pretty new, and there were a lot of people who were like putting websites up, but had no idea what they were supposed to put on them. And so they would hire me. And it's not the same kind of writing as what I do now, but I did that for about 20 years. And that's what I did while raising my children. And then now my children are all grown and having babies of their own. And I wanted to do something more creative, although I was terrified. Because when you create your characters, it's a whole lot different than creating something about how to sell a real estate, piece of property or whatever. It's a very different thing. So yeah, I finally decided to try to write a book. And the first manuscript I wrote is horrible. But so would be the first painting you ever tried to paint, or the first, time you ever sat down to a piano. I mean, you don't know what you're doing, but it taught me that I had that many words inside of me. And so then I just started writing until I finally got to a point where my writing was good enough that I took it to an editor, and my editor helped me make it even better. And then I'm published. So it wasn't like a lifelong dream. I just kind of found myself thinking, where do I go from here? My kids are grown. I don't want to start teaching school at my age. I don't want to go back to school. What do I want to do? And I thought, I want to write a book. And so I did. Yeah.
So you did. You were perhaps writing your own story, and God was writing your story.
That's
and
true.
He brought you. And today you are not only an author, you are also the co-host of the Writers Lounge podcast. Tell us about this podcast. What is it that you talk about, and how people can learn there better?
Yes, so the Writers Lounge, we actually interview authors who are new. So you have to have written 3 books or less, and not have been, on a New York Times bestsellers list yet, so an author more like me, like just getting started. And what's interesting, I was on the podcast as a guest. And when we were through, the host, his name is Tom, said, "Hey, I've been looking for a co-host, and I just enjoyed having you on the show. Would you like to co-host with me?" And it was like, oh, this is the best thing ever, because no, I mean, I love it. And in fact, we've started to laugh now and say that the show is really Find Teri a New Friend show, because we bring authors on, and immediately I find connections with these authors, and then I end up we email back and forth after the show, and I've had several that have become like really buddies of mine now, that we trade work, and hey, would you read this for me, and I'll read that, and that kind of thing. And so so that's that show, and it is, like I said, new authors, and we read their books, and then we discuss them, and we talk about like what makes your book unique, and then kind of also what makes you as an author unique. And let's talk about that. And we get that out there, and we tell them, now you can use this podcast as a way to market. So, take pieces and parts of it and put it out there and get it out on all your different channels. And so we're doing it as a way of helping new authors have, just a way of getting their message out to people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is much to talk about you. There is much to talk about stories. And there is much to talk about the stories that are yet to be written.
That's
which
exactly
are,
right.
Millions of budding writers, millions of struggling writers, millions of aspiring writers. So how can people who want to know more about you, they can get in touch with you? How can they do that? And also for people who want to engage with you professionally, what's best the way to do that?
The best way is just to go to my website. And my website is www.TeriMBrown.com. So it's Teri, just like in the, down here, and it's Teri with one R. So it's TERIM Brown.com. There, if you are more into social media, all of my social media platforms are listed, so you can just click the little buttons, the little icons, and I'm everywhere. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I even am on Threads, though I don't know what I'm doing there yet because it's so new. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Pinterest, LinkedIn. I'm pretty much everywhere. So if you want to find me, that's the best way, is just start at my website. And then definitely, I have a newsletter that comes out twice a month, and I'd love for you to follow that. You find out news about me, but you also find out what I've been reading, and I give book reviews about different books that I've read or different podcasts that I've listened to or whatever. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't know much about Threads, nor do I. But one thing I know, that God has connected many, many dots in your life, and that has brought so many characters, so many stories through across so many different time zones and brought them to life. On this note, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me.